On 27th February, Africa did not whisper. It declared, resisted, negotiated, and reimagined its place in the world. Across different centuries, this single date carries the weight of empire and the courage of liberation. It is a day that connects war to diplomacy, colonial conquest to independence movements, and regional dreams to global stages. When we trace African history through 27 February, we begin to see a powerful pattern: Africa confronting power and redefining destiny. At the dawn of the 20th century, Southern Africa stood at the center of one of the British Empire's most determined military campaigns. It was approaching its final months in February 1902. The conflict, which began in 1899, was fought between the British Empire and the two Boer republics, the South African Republic, Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. Beneath the surface of political tensions lay economic ambition. Gold and diamonds had transformed Southern Africa into a strategic prize, and Britain was determined to consolidate control. By 27 February 1902, the war had shifted from conventional battlefield engagements to guerrilla resistance and harsh countermeasures. Boer commandos had adopted mobile tactics, striking unexpectedly and retreating into the vast countryside. In response, British forces implemented a scorched earth policy. Farms were burned, livestock was destroyed, crops were razed. The intention was clear: cut off support for guerrilla fighters by dismantling rural life itself. One of the darkest chapters of this war was the establishment of concentration camps. Tens of thousands of Boer women and children were interned under harsh conditions, and thousands died due to disease and malnutrition. Often overlooked in broader narratives were the thousands of black Africans also confined in separate camps. Their suffering was immense, yet their stories were rarely centered in early historical accounts. The war exposed the racial hierarchies embedded within colonial systems, hierarchies that would later crystallize into more formalized structures of segregation. As February 1902 unfolded, negotiations were already being discussed behind closed doors. The Boers were exhausted. British resources, though strained, were vast. The Treaty of Vereeniging would be signed in May 1902, formally ending the war. But even before that signature, the outcome was reshaping Southern Africa. British victory would eventually lead to the formation of the Union of South Africa in 1910, uniting former colonies and republics under a single political entity. However, that union was built on exclusion. Political rights were largely reserved for the white minority, while black Africans, colored communities, and Indians were systematically marginalized. The legal and political foundations laid in the aftermath of the war created a framework that later hardened into apartheid in 1948. Thus, when we reflect on 27 February 1902, we see not just the closing chapter of a war, but the reinforcement of a system whose consequences would last for nearly a century, yet history never moves in only one direction. While empire consolidated power in 1902, the seeds of resistance were quietly growing. Across Southern Africa, African political consciousness was emerging. Mission-educated elites, traditional leaders, workers, and intellectuals would, over decades, build movements that challenged racial domination. The struggles of the 20th century cannot be separated from the outcomes of the Boer War. Empire created the structure. Resistance created the future. Leap forward 74 years to 27th of February 1976, and the narrative shifts from imperial consolidation to the declaration of a new republic. On that day, the liberation movement known as proclaimed the establishment of the setting was the vast desert territory of Western Sahara, formerly under Spanish colonial rule. Spain's presence in Western Sahara dated back to the late 19th century. As the wave of African independence swept across the continent in the 1950s and 1960s, pressure mounted on Spain to decolonize. By the mid-1970s, the dictatorship of Francisco Franco was nearing its end, and Spain signaled its intention to withdraw. However, the question of what would replace colonial authority became deeply contested. Morocco and Mauritania laid claims to the territory, citing historical ties. Meanwhile, the Polisario Front, formed in 1973, advocated for full independence for the Sahrawi people. In November 1975, the Madrid Accords facilitated Spain's withdrawal, but effectively divided administrative control between Morocco and Mauritania. For many Sahrawis, this arrangement represented not decolonization, but transfer of control. On 27th of February 1976, just one day after Spain's final withdrawal, the Polisario Front declared the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. It was a bold assertion of sovereignty,